Namaste and welcome to the Hindu Parenting Podcast. It is that time of year when many students from India go to the US for college. A couple of decades ago, students used to go mainly for master's programs, but now we see younger students just out of school going to join undergraduate programs. Sending a child abroad to study is increasingly viewed as an end in itself. Do Hindu parents give a thought to what awaits their children in college? What is the college experience like for Hindu students? What kind of changes could we see in them when they come back home for a visit? Our aim in doing this podcast is to explore the range of issues faced by Hindu students and parents, and also to get a conversation going among parents. Who better to help us wade through the maze of questions than Vijaya Viswanathan, co-author of the latest bestseller, Snakes in the Ganga. Vijaya ji is also the co-founder of Agastya Gurukulam, which aims to revive the traditional Bharatiya method of education. Namaste, Vijaya ji.
Namaste, Rekha ji and Shalini ji. Lovely to be here with you guys today.
We are super excited to have you as part of the podcast today. Perhaps a good place to start this conversation would be to think about the feelings of parents sending their 18-year-old children far away from home. Parents no doubt have their apprehensions, but the general thought is that if they have made it so far without any major problems or vices, children are going to be okay because they're now adults. How realistic is this? Does parenting end at 18? Could things go wrong after that? What's it like out there?
So first of all, we have to ask, what is adulthood and who defines it? In the old days, in the Indian context, we would have young teenagers get married. This is maybe 3-4 generations ago. And of course, we all looked at it as child marriage, and we mocked it. We don't want it anymore, and for right reasons also, perhaps. But one thing good about that, redeeming about that, was it was just not marriage for the sake of marriage, but it taught people to take responsibilities. It taught young adults to take responsibilities, right? So you had 16-year-olds who were married, and we mocked that. But here we have 16-year-olds who are okay with having sexual relationships without any of the responsibilities. So now we define adulthood as having rights of adulthood, without having any of the responsibility of what it takes to be an adult. So even these children who are going overseas, they are all dependent on their parents. Parents take loans, take money, and fund this education. So that is, so they are dependent on the parent, like being children, and yet they want rights of an adult, which is sort of ironical because we don't look at it. We've just bought into this whole American Western frameworks and metrics. They have certain standards that we follow implicitly without even questioning. So somehow 18 magically becomes one becomes an adult, and there is no other discussion whether the person is mature enough, because different children are, you find young women are more mature than young men, for example, right? And within that also, you find, even if anyone who's had 2-3 children, who's a parent of 2 or 3 children, will understand that one child always is more mature than the other child. So being raised in the same household and having similar samskaras and the same genes, if you will. So it's also an individual thing. So I think we need to look at what exactly do we mean by adulthood. Does it just mean a certain age, or do we talk about the individual and their rights, or should we look at what should be their responsibility? Can they take care of themselves in every aspect? Because being an adult is to be totally independent. And I think the Americans do a good job about that. They tell you, okay, now you're 18, now you fend for yourself, right? Whereas Indians, we cherry pick, okay, the 18 magical number, 18 years old, you're adult now. But of course, we fund and we mollycoddle and we send food and make, call another relative to take care of them when they are in trouble, all of that. And we never let them work. We just say, go study, I'll take a loan. So we sort of treat them like a child, but then we give them all these entitlements of adulthood. And so I think it ends up being a disaster. Whereas the American parent would just say, well, you're an adult now, you can have a boyfriend, but toss burgers in the morning and you can go on a date in the night, and that's up to you. I'm not funding any of this.
No, so you've talked about the child angle in this. Flip it around. What about the parenting angle? I mean, you did touch on it a little bit, that we do the thing. So, like Rekha asked, parenting, does it end at 18? It does in the US, apparently. So
Yeah, but it does end at, in the US, it definitely ends at 18, and there are rights and responsibilities that go hand in hand. With the India, I think Indian parents do it all upside down. We cherry pick different things because we succumb to the pressure. And we think, okay, now it should end, and this is a rite of passage. People should be independent at 18. And yet we can't let go in some ways, because we know the children can't take care of themselves. Yeah, financially, how many kids, entire privileged, forget even sending them abroad. Look at even Ashoka. When we look at the kids that go to Ashoka, the kids that are not on any kind of scholarship or whatever, right? Very few of them are on scholarship. Many parents spend 10 lakhs a year for 4 years and send their kids to live in a dorm, because again, that's what Ashoka asks you to do. They want you to live in a dorm. And so we say yes without even questioning, and we pay for it. So the Indian parent is also sort of gullible and just goes with the flow without thinking. So as much as I would say the system outside can be blamed for all these vices, I think the Indian parent also, the average Indian parent, doesn't question anything. So I think the Indian parent needs to question whether what he or she is doing is right. I know we all love our children a lot, but I think if we are giving them rights, we should tell them to have responsibility, which we are not able to. In that respect, we want to be Indian. So Indian parents should really think about what is it that they're trying to achieve by, on one side, spoiling their children, on the other side, giving them this kind of endless amount of rights, and then not having boundaries to say this is where the buck stops, and essentially taking charge. It all amounts to taking charge, right? We need to take charge. And parenting is not always about saying yes. Parenting is about drawing boundaries. And if those boundaries have to be crossed, then we have to renegotiate the terms, right? We have to renegotiate the responsibilities part of the equation with the child.
So it seems like you're saying Indian parents can do a much better job of preparing their kids, first of all. So would you have any suggestions as to, what are the kind of things that that parents can start talking to kids about? And this being a Hindu parenting podcast, I would like to ask specifically about Hindu parents, because as far as resources are concerned, I think a lot of Jewish, Christian, or Muslim groups, they have their own circles, and they have their own, prayer rooms or mosques, chapels, whatever. And they do have a group of students that they can interact with. But when you talk about Hindu students specifically, we are just sending them off without much preparation about what they could expect. So how can we do a better job of this?
Okay, first is to understand what you can expect, right? When you send your child abroad. Now, first of all, we Hindu parents have not given them samskaras of just daily prayer. How many families actually do a 5-minute puja in the morning every day? It's that has been lost. They say my grandmother, my mother-in-law used to do it. Even the people in the 40s and 50s will say, oh, my mother-in-law does puja, but we don't. Or my mother and grandmother used to do Vishnu Sahasranamam, but we don't. So we don't continue that in the house. And our children essentially, in fact, many Marwadi houses, you will see there'll be a pandit that comes in. Very rich Marwadi houses I've been to, they have a pandit come in every day to do Nitya Puja. And so everybody takes aarti, all of that. Very nice. But the next generation, the kids are all educated overseas, they're not going to follow this, right? So even those houses where the youngsters have been raised in that atmosphere, they are sort of losing it. Now, so we're not preparing them with samskaras, and then we are sending them overseas to an environment that's totally alien. Now, what can you sort of expect? For example, there's a lot of Hindu phobia. In many people talk about Hindu phobia, but this is a real thing. There is a study by Rutgers University which shows on social media, how much Hindu phobia there is. There are memes, genocidal memes on Hindus by various Islamist networks, and then there are Telegram groups that are Hindu phobic. So there's a big AI study done using AI, and they have said that there is indeed a lot of Hindu phobia on social media platforms. So our kids are all exposed to social media platforms, and in the US you will face that even more, because those become relevant in the ecosystem over here. So what can Hindu students expect when they come here? They can see a lot of Hindu phobia on social media. Then if they are in schools like, even Ivy Leagues, like especially Ivy Leagues, I would say, like UPenn, we had Suraj Yengade, who is a Harvard fellow, who goes to UPenn and tells Hindu kids that if you have to be an ally for the anti-casteist movement, then you essentially have to disown your parents, because your parents are propagating casteism from one generation to another, and you essentially are the inheritor of these casteist structural bias, and you propagate it. So you essentially have to disown your parents. So this is what is being taught to young children. So you're paying this hefty fees of $75,000 or so per year for a UPenn, University of Pennsylvania education, and you have a Harvard scholar coming to you and telling you to disown your parents. So this is, first of all, they put a guilt upon the students, saying that you guys are all castes, even though the children say that, hey, my parents have not done anything. I've not seen them being biased or casteist or whatever. And neither am I. But that's not enough to be an ally. An ally means you have to actively commit yourself to the movement, anti-casteist movement, which is based on critical race theory. And to do that, they have to actually disown their parents. So this is something that is actually new. In the past decade or so, this is happening, where Hindu phobia is just not some random attack and you can just go about your business, but you are asked, your kids abroad are asked to commit to fighting this so-called injustice that they see. And the only way they can fight it is not just virtue signaling here and there, but to actually be on the streets protesting, disown your parents, commit time and money towards the cause, be an activist with followers and an influencer of sorts. So that is what is being incentivized for your kids. The other thing that's happening is, we have children that have some sort of samskaras. We did an interview with a lady by the name of Shobha Swami on the Infinity Foundation, and she raised her kids by the book. She taught them dance, classical dance and music and all of that. And she'd send their kids. She herself was a Chinmaya Mission teacher. She taught weekend Sunday classes. Her children were all fine. But then when they went to college, they got pulled into equality labs and some of the Hindu-phobic groups. Again, there is a lot of incentives. You get graduate school admission, you get jobs very easily when you show on your resume that you are an activist fighting for social justice. So there is a big network, an ecosystem that is built to encourage your children to fight their heritage, fight their parents, and not be sort of a conservative Hindu and join the other side. There's a huge incentive because you get jobs, you get fame, you become a celebrity on social media. So these are all big dangers that's happened in the recent past, like 10-15 years. It's not like how it was before. and younger children are coming to the US, right? Before it used to be only for graduate school. Now there are undergrads coming in.
Yeah, that's more difficult to handle, I would say, right? Because the younger you are, the more you're susceptible to influences from outside, and the harder it is for you to take a perspective on what is actually happening outside. You see, let's say a couple of decades ago, or maybe even before that, the earliest instance that Hindu parents might be aware of is this dot busters thing that happened in New Jersey, where Hindu women who had a bindi on their forehead would get attacked. But all those were physical attacks. So the nature of attacks is not physical. And I think that throws off a lot of parents who I have heard parents say that nothing physical is happening to the child. Nobody is attacking them. So what do we worry about? What could possibly go wrong? And what you said really brought that out beautifully, because it is an active participation in destroying your links with your own heritage. I think that is the danger that most parents, at least the people sending their kids from India, are simply not yet aware of.
Right. So there are on the physical side, there are two kinds of dangers. One is a general danger, and one is a specific Hindu specific danger. So the general dangers are, of course, drugs, alcohol, and eating beef, things like that. Okay. Mm-hmm. So and if you go into grad school, some of those things you do not get involved in, because grad students they are quite serious. They are more mature. They don't have time for these sort of recreational things. But undergrad, what Hindu parents don't understand is that undergrad year one, they call them frosh, right? Freshmen are called frosh. The frosh dorms, and they put them in separate dorms called frosh dorms, and or a combination. And there's a mandate that you have to live in a dormitory system. Yeah, even if you live a stone's throw away from the university, most US university, barring a few state schools, right, insist upon the fact that you live in the dorm. And what they say is that you build friendships for life, and this is where you network, and there is this camaraderie and brotherhood and all of that, and students that way become close and a tight-knit community. Again, all that sounds really good, but the UK does not have that. The UK says, well, you can live in a single room or a double room, or you can share. It's all basically, it depends on the finances, right? If you're willing to pay a lot, you can even get an apartment in one of the British colleges and live a life of luxury. If you don't have any money at all, you share your room with 4 people. Right. So it's based on how much you can fund your board. But in America, it's not like that. Whether you have money or not, you have to take a loan and sign up for a meal plan, which usually most colleges have horrible meal plans, because these colleges make money out of the food program. So they take money from you, and then they outsource it to some cheap caterer, and it's canned food, and the food is really not that great. Yeah. But they make money out of it. It's a big money maker. And so is the residence hall. The residence hall, you pay, the room and board goes anywhere from, it's about $20,000 or maybe give or take, right? And so this is a huge money maker for American colleges. And one must understand that American colleges are all about making money.
This is a dorm, you're saying, no? 20,000 for a bed in a dorm.
Room and board, whatever, meal plan, and you have to have a meal plan. You cannot, of course, say I don't want the meal plan. Yeah. Barring a few exceptions, right? So you have the very fact that you mandate that the first year or the first 2 years you absolutely have to stay on campus. Yeah, red alarm bells should go off, but nobody questions it, because they just say, oh, it's a rite of passage. You learn to bond, and the children are told that. The children are said, this is the rite of passage and you will have a time of your life. It is like how the prom is built up, right, in high school, that you have to go to the prom. Nobody questions, there are chaperones, and high school kids, right, are dressed up and then they go for a dance and they take photographs like, like a married couple, right? But, and then there are adults who are chaperones to ensure that, so you bring fire to Karpuram and you make sure that it doesn't ignite. Right. So there are adults who are chaperoning them, making sure that they're not dancing too closely, or they're not having alcohol and, and just disappearing under some bush. So you have all of that. So it's sort of a ridiculous, and nobody questions any of this. Right. And all the kids are told that this is, your high school prom, how can you not go? It's a rite of passage. And for the American society, maybe it's okay. Right. Because they have to go out and find mates and then they're on their own. But and so similarly the dom is also a rite of passage. So all the kids will say, of course, even in Ashoka, Indian kids will say, oh, I have to be in Ashoka and bond with my classmates, and it's very stressful for most of them. They share a room with a roommate, and sometimes they don't get along. That first time they're out of the house, they're trying to live by themselves. The roommate might bring a boyfriend or a girlfriend, and in front of you have sexual relationships in front of your eyes. So all these things happen, right, in the dorm room, and there's no escape. So we have to essentially ask ourselves that when you send your kids in the undergrad years, there are extra physical things, right? One is, so getting back to your question, right? One is very general in terms of drugs, alcohol, meat, and sexual activity, all of that. And one should ask yourself, okay, are you ready for all of this? Are you, can they manage it? They are old enough to manage this, you think? I don't know. At 18, if kids raised in India are old enough to manage this. So those are the physical dangers that exist. And in fact, most of the undergrad dorms have parties with vaping, drugs, and alcohol. There's no party if you do not. I've heard this from many undergrad kids that are raised in the US, who will say that if you do not drink or do drugs, you cannot mingle and party. You're essentially ostracized, right? You can't, what do you go to the party and do? Because everybody's drinking and on drugs. So again, this is the rite of passage. Nobody questions it. Everybody says it's okay in college. Yeah, you'll try a few drugs and marijuana, and that's how you figure out whatever. I don't know. I question these things, and I wonder if, should it be a rite of passage? Should we really, should you try out everything in life? I'm not sure, right? Then some things are not good for you. You should not, right? You could become an addict. You could get into trouble. So there are these kinds of general physical things that could, that are dangers. And then, of course, you have the Hindu specific things. And the Hindu specific things are not physical. They are not, like I mentioned, they are more, a conversion of sorts. It's an orientation, a conversion and orientation of the child, which is actually more dangerous than a physical act of violence. If there's a dot buster or something, you can report the crime. You don't have to take it so personally, and you can move on. You can avoid certain bad neighborhoods, whatever. But the mental orientation, sort of these indoctrination programs, actually are coming not from some stranger of the street. It is coming from the people whom you give these tens of thousands of dollars to, and they're teaching you. It's part of the curriculum. So they are in a position of power, and you need the marks and you need the job. And so you will comply.
Yeah. At the undergrad level, it was interesting that you mentioned all the physical dangers first. We had done a series on mental health. Mm-hmm. And the second part of that, there was a student who mentioned exactly the same thing about the pressures on the students to comply with, the parties, the drinks, the late hours, and the people who don't are, feeling quite isolated. And there is a severe mental health problem that they face. And even the people who participate in all these things, they have their own mental health issues, and especially students prone to some kind of an anxiety or depression. this is the time when all this kicks in, and it gets very, very hard for them to come out of the cycle. So this we did discuss on one of the prior episodes, and
it's true. You're very right. Mental health is a huge problem in these universities, because in fact, in Stanford, it's called the Stanford duck syndrome, for example. So with social media and also being in an elite college, one is forced in some ways. An 18-year-old is forced to put up a facade of everything being hunky-dory, and you're healthy, you're happy, you're doing well in classes, yet you're partying till 2 a.m. in the morning. So you're forced to sort of give that facade. And what happens is, it's called so they joke, and it's actually not a joke, because they call it the Stanford duck syndrome, where outside the duck is gliding through the water seamlessly, right, effortlessly, but underneath the water, the feet, the webbed feet, are actually frantically pedaling, right, to cope up, to just stay afloat, right? So it's called the Stanford duck syndrome, where everything is hidden, all your struggles are hidden, and yet you're cruising on the surface of the water on a beautiful sunny day. So, and with social media, your people post such pictures of just how great they are and how well they can manage their lives on campus, and the mental health crisis is at its peak.
Another thing parents really underestimate is the effect on the students' health from this, freshman 15, they call it, right? You put on a minimum of 15 pounds from all the horrible, bad food that you get in the cafeteria. And that's the meal plan that you absolutely have to take. And it's not just that you could become overweight. That's the least of your problems. It could set in cycle hormonal issues. The food is really bad. So that's something most parents don't even consider. So all that is, the physical problems. Then I had parent who sent her child, her son, to one of the maybe the Ivy League schools. And as an undergrad, you're required to take a breadth of liberal arts courses. And this boy was encouraged at home to take courses pertaining to Hinduism, Bhagavad Gita and all that. Because parents tend to think, okay, great. I mean, my son or my daughter is going to learn something about our heritage. How wonderful is this? But there's a big problem here, right?
Absolutely. In fact, you should not take, you should absolutely not take any courses related to Hinduism. Shalini very much knows this because this is what we deal with in Infinity Foundation. In fact, they are taught systematically that Hindu scriptures justify violence. They bring up the Bhagavad Gita and say the Bhagavad Gita is a violent book. I think this is what Wendy Doniger said. She's a very big professor of Hinduism in University of Chicago, and she says, the Gita is a dishonest book, and it justifies violence, and it goads people to be violent. And then, of course, you have the caste cow curry, like Rajiv ji says. Everything is about caste, and now with critical race theory, caste has taken a new avatar, if you will, and where like I mentioned, you're asked to take a position of being an anti-casteist, an ally to fight caste. And of course, they talk about how the Puranas and Shastras full of rape culture. There is it's totally embedded in this, and this oppressive nature of Shastra. So you cannot get away by saying this about any other religion. But with the Hinduism, it is an open season. And the people that teach, so one of the things parents should realize is that, and Rajiv ji talks about this at length, is that when you go into university to study Judaism or Christianity or Islam, or even Jainism for that matter to some extent, you will find the people who are practitioners of that religion are the ones that are teaching that religion, right? Or the books pertaining to that that faith. Whereas for Hinduism, you will find outsiders outsiders who do not practice the religion. So they have bring in this, this critical pedagogy, so to speak, into Hinduism. In fact, critical Hindu studies is a new a group of scholars. They formed this thing called critical Hindu studies, and they're looking at Hindu shastras and literature from the angle of social justice. So
I see.
yeah.
So this is a free for all. Hinduism is a free for all. Anybody,
Exactly,
especially if you're not a Hindu, can come in and say whatever you like.
Yeah.
Right?
So the professors who teach Hinduism and shastras are all non-Hindus for the most part, right? Or so-called Hindus who were sold out, they needed a job and they've gone to the other side and to talk about how bad Hinduism is, from a social justice standpoint. So whereas it doesn't happen with Islam, it doesn't happen with Judaism, it doesn't happen with Christianity, because the people who are teaching these courses to the kids are all practitioners of the faith. So this is a huge difference. And so one thing parents should do is, okay, we're spending money, never to take even a language class, never even to take Sanskrit or any of that. You should have taught all of that before they were 18. And if you didn't do the job, don't expect somebody else to do the job.
Just to close the loop on the Hindu boy who came back home after a year of college, he refused to pray to Krishna anymore. Okay, so that's when the mother started thinking, what happened in college. So, okay.
So what you will also see with the liberal arts curriculum is that definitely not do anything related with Indology or Indian languages. B, you will get exposed to Marxist ideas as it pertains to the US and the Western civilization, which is also bad, because I think most of the education is Marxist in its nature when it comes to social sciences and humanities, even in education. So when you look at, say, the Harvard School of Education, the whole idea is to bring in this whole Marxist idea where you want to make teaching and learning all about social justice. So this has crept in. The left has done a wonderful job of creeping into every aspect of of the university, every subject. Now, what is interesting is that many in higher ed, especially in the STEM fields, they left the people in the humanities alone. They said, what, these guys are crazy, and let them do whatever they need to do. And of course, ours are objective sciences, like physics and math. But lo and behold, they have entered the fields of STEM as well. Now, in higher education in the US, the journals are all hijacked by the left. So unless it's something to do with social justice or improving the number of women physicists, their representation in journals, you really cannot publish anything. So this idea of patriarchy and oppressor, the fields that are dominated by oppressors, right, like the white male, they have now also succumbed to the woke commissar mob. And this is done through DEI offices in higher education. This is also done through the entire hijacking and capturing of publications and journals. So the American Medical Association is totally captured. They go into this whole thing of how we have to re-educate everybody on this new radical gender theory and gender fluidity and things like that. And anyone who has a different view is silenced. In fact, Richard Dawkins is getting a lot of flack right now because he's a guy from the left, but he said ecologically, biologically there are only two genders, and then Dawkins is getting a lot of flack from all sides. So even in higher ed, these have been captured. So but in liberal arts especially, I think Hindu parents should stay away from spending this kind of money, and putting their kids through a liberal arts education. I mean, so let's face it, Hindu parents haven't done much in instilling samskaras, values, identity, all of that in their children. So, well, something that maybe younger parents can think about doing, but the parents right now who are sending their children, well, bygones are bygones. Whatever's happened has happened. But what you can do is minimize the damage. And how do you minimize the damage? One is to ensure that your kids do not go into liberal arts, as fashionable as they may sound. And number two, to ensure that the ideas like Rajiv Ji's ideas, or the book Being Different is a wonderful book. There are different books and resources available to actually sit and educate them before they go, so that they at least understand what is about their identity, their civilization, what is the other side of this narrative, right? How are people refuting and giving rebuttals to this indoctrination that goes on in universities, so that they have some idea. And number three is there are organizations like Hindu Students Council. Hindu Students Council is a very good organization. It started off small, but it's in many, many, many universities. And if your university...
There's Hindu on campus and Hindu Yuva, right?
Hindu Yuva is there, but Hindu Students Council is also a very good group, and they fight a lot of Hindu phobia. Hindu Yuva is sort of a networking. They don't do that much activism, I think, but Hindu Students Council is everywhere. And Hindu American Foundation is another place, but Hindu Students Council is very, very targeted towards Hindu kids in college. Now, your university may not have a Hindu Students Council, but I think you should encourage your child to then start a Hindu Students Council chapter in your college, in their college, and have other kids join it. So sometimes Hindu parents are just looking for solutions without being part of the solution. So I think the time has come that, you just can't expect a magic pill to solve all your problems after you having done no work. So one of the things that you can encourage your child is to say, hey, if you don't have a Hindu Students Council chapter in your college, why don't you start? And I will, help you connect. And I will, and as a parent, you can try and help as well to make your child successful, to provide support to your child as he or she is doing these things which are kind of unprecedented. There was like, okay, lie low, don't create ripples, and just settle down, and then we'll see. That is the general attitude. But college is also just 4 years, and if you start off in the first year to start a Hindu Students Council chapter, it by year 2 or 3 is when that will come to fruition. And meanwhile, you collect some other Hindu students, and you start having programs. So there are people to help you. But I think Hindu parents should also encourage Hindu children to take leadership and put in effort to make it happen, because it's not too late. It's not too late.
I think a lot of these organizations, Hindu students tend to join organizations that say Indian students, right? I mean, it includes everybody. It is not necessarily a bad thing, but sometimes what happens, especially in maybe in Ivy Leagues or even in the University of California system, is a lot of pressure on declaring Hindu festivals, like say Holi is violent, Diwali is casteist, and so on. And so, there's a lot of pressure on this Hindu students to join the protesting gang. And the few students who do not join are left with no friends. And that can create a lot of isolation. And so maybe parents can also educate their children to that these kinds of things happen, and festivals are not casteist, and they can always stand up to all these things, right, along with their friends. Or at least they can stop putting their friends down. The people who do resist should not be ostracized. I think that much can be communicated at home, right?
Yeah, and for example, you brought up Holi. Now, Holi against Hindutva was the campaign that the left had started, the Hinduphobic groups started. Now, Hindu Students Council did something, I think, similar to that, but on the other side, where they said United Colors of Holi. And so if you do join a group like Hindu Students Council, you also have the large network support of a nationwide network that would support you in whatever you're doing. Right. So it's important that children who want to celebrate and be their sort of authentic self, and practice their faith, they can join these groups, because see, most of the other groups, be it you have the Jewish kids have the Hillel House or whatever, they have support. The Christian kids, of course, have seminaries and Christian faith groups that support them, and of course the leftist groups, whether it's LGBTQ, Alphabet Soup, they all have support groups. Unfortunately, the Hindu kid does not have any support. And so Hindu Students Council type groups with with this attitude of embracing Hinduism needs to be brought into many campuses. In fact, there is a Hindu Students Association, which is actually a leftist group. They are supported by institutions like Sadhana, the Association for Progressive Hindus, as they call themselves. So these are all Marxist Hindu, so-called Hindu groups, which are all
just
the time.
like I think there's one Hindus for Human Rights, which is to be avoided like the plague.
Hindu Students Association is also to be avoided.
Okay, because anything with the word Hindu in it is not necessarily run by Hindus.
Absolutely.
That is another strange thing in the US, right?
Absolutely. Because these are all, there is a group called Sadhana, which is a vicious group that attacks, anything Hindu and anything dharmic in the name of Hindutva, and they call them, these casteist Hindutva, Vadi, things like that. So, yes, one should, join the correct group. So parents can do that kind of spade work, can do the research and tell the kids to, hey, here's a number, make it easy for them. Here's a number, call them. And in fact, the parents themselves can make some of these connections. There's nothing wrong in saying, hey, I have a kid coming there, whom should he or she call, and establish those networks even before they go.
Yeah, this is wonderful information. What would you rank as the top danger for children going to the US to study from India today?
I think the whole venture itself, if you ask me, I know I have 2 kids in the US and I might look as a hypocrite saying this, but I actually think that one should stay away from sending your children abroad. Because you are feeding a crocodile. The American universities are about, they're a business, right? And you're paying money and not even getting what you want. Your kids come back home as a disaster. Now, why would you actually pay tens of thousands of dollars and do this to your child, right? Because your whole life you have worked hard. Everything that you've done is for the sake of children. You've made sacrifices, personal sacrifices. You love your children deeply, and you take loans and hard-earned money and you dump it overseas. You have to understand what the US education model is, apart from this. So the undergrad education is where the US colleges make the most of their money, right? So like I said, you pay for room, you're mandated to live there, so room and board and tuition for 4 years. So the money that they get from the undergrad students is what keeps the tennis courts, the swimming pools, the entire gardens and all the facilities going, right? So it pays for that, and the remaining money is used for endowment, things like that. Now, American colleges, so they and undergrad admissions also, you are discriminated against, right? Because Asian males are considered white adjacent. They don't want them in certain universities, and they've built up this brand. So the Ivy Leagues have built up such a brand, and most American colleges, it's a brand that you're buying. Yeah, you can proudly say my son or daughter went to Harvard, and it's just a brand. So that what they're selling to you is a brand name. Forget about education. In fact, some of the in Harvard and all, the undergrad courses are taught by PhD students. They're not even taught by professors till you get to some higher classes, right? So people don't even look at that. They just want the Harvard brand. Whereas in Princeton, I guess actual professors teach you in the undergrad. Whereas in Harvard, I've been told that a lot of the classes, the professors don't even bother teaching you. These are all freshmen, big classes, and the TA just teaches you. So we are willing to pay tens of thousands of dollars for this kind of education. Now in grad school, so you can ask yourself, so how come then do they have, how does an Ivy League, if they just, if their incoming class is not selected through a meritocratic process, how do they maintain their rankings, right? So this is where it's interesting. So in grad school, if you look, you will find most of them, 80 to 90% of grad school kids, it can go from anywhere from 65 to 90, 95, are all foreign students. So how they maintain ranking is, in grad school is where the meritocracy kicks in. So they will get the top kids from Eastern Europe and China and India and give them some aid and, the old-fashioned way of going to America. So, and then you end up becoming cheap labor. Somebody else like the IIT or some other institute has done all the hard work of teaching you. And then they get to pick the best and the brightest from all these institutions worldwide. And they bring them over to MIT and Harvard and all of them, and then they put them into research, and they churn out papers, and then they're at the top of the game, and that's how the ranking is got. So on one side, they poach the brains for maintaining ranking, and in the past, they used to have mostly US kids doing the undergrad. And what is really sad is these schools are actually doing America a disservice, because they're supposed to educate American kids to be the best and the brightest. Whereas what they do is they just get a boatload of American kids for the undergrad. There's no meritocracy, and they're really not. And a few of them, of course, go on to grad school. But if you look at the number of kids from overseas coming to grad school, it shows that the American system has not prepared their own for their graduate education, right? Because they're poaching off other countries. So it's a disservice to the American citizens. It's also a terrible thing that they do by poaching the best and the brightest minds from the world over. So this is this is sort of the ethos of American universities. They are a shark-like business attitude they have towards education. And there's no idea of, there's no concept of Vidya Danam or any of that, right? They might give you a scholarship because you're good enough, and they make an investment in you, and they can reap off many patents and this and that and papers and prestige through you. That's why they give you something. So if you understand how the American system works, then you would not even bother sending your kids to the US, because the skills. Another very disturbing thing is that the kids that go through undergrad and come out with their liberal arts degree actually don't get jobs. They end up being diversity officers. In fact, if you look at any of these Ivy League universities, look at the admissions officers' profiles, right? Go to Columbia University and go to LinkedIn and say admissions officers. There'll be 10 of them. In the website, they'd have listed all the admissions officers. All of them will be anywhere from 25 to 35. All of them will have some useless degree in humanities and social sciences. And they sit as admissions officers, making decisions to bring in people. So, of course, they will bring in similar birds of the same feather, right? Who are into social justice and, students like that. Which itself is they are in no position to make decisions. They don't have the IQ nor the experience or anything. They're just undergrad kids who've done a useless degree, who go back becoming an admissions officer. And you can look at that. Whereas in the UK, it's not like that. In the UK, if you want to get into Oxford and Cambridge, a professor will interview you. Here, some, 20, 25 to 30-year-old will interview you and ask you about what, and the interview means nothing. It's
Mhm.
the whole process is so corrupt. So do you want to spend tens of thousands of dollars and send your kid with all these risks attached just for a degree? I think
Mhm.
you can instead, I think we have to rethink and reimagine education and say, what should my child be? They should have a skill. They should be able to, have outer and inner balance. So, mental health is so important. You just send your kid here, he has a Harvard degree, but he's a basket case. It's not worth it. So we have to rethink this whole thing. Should we even send the kids overseas? Should be a question that every parent should ask, Hindu or otherwise.
Yeah, it's been an eye-opening conversation filled with valuable suggestions. One last thing. Could you just talk briefly about the South Asia Studies departments? Because I know that, again, just as Indian parents and kids do get attracted to learning about their heritage, quote unquote, learning about their heritage, there is also this attraction towards South Asian studies.
South Asian studies, first of all, clubbing India with South Asia is problematic. It merges India into this vast area. There has been many Hindu-phobic professors. So, for example, you have this Audrey Trushke out of Rutgers, and then you have Wendy Doniger. We have enough, Jeffrey Kirpal. We have tons of, in fact, any South Asian professor you can by default say is Hindu-phobic, unless, of course, he's working on some poetry or something benign like that. The field itself is sort of benign and doesn't get controversial. You have Sheldon Pollock of Columbia. So Rajiv ji out of Infinity Foundation, done a lot of work on these kinds of people, what they've put out in terms of atrocity literature and scholarship in the name of scholarship. So an example for fun for people to see how corrupt the American system is. A few years ago, there was this grievance study hoax. I don't know if you're familiar with this. Three people, James Lindsay, Professor Peter Boghossian, and Helen Pluckrose, three of them, they got together and they were very troubled by the social sciences papers, right, that come out. Like you have all these, you have a bunch of departments with ending with studies called fat studies, African American studies, and LGBTQ, whatever, gender queer studies, things like that, and essentially coming under the umbrella of grievance studies. So these guys sat down and they were professors in philosophy, math, and all that. So they wrote a bunch of papers, 20 papers under different names, and submitted it to these very so-called prestigious journals of in grievance studies area. And out of the 20 odd papers, 16 got accepted, 1 or 2 even got awards. And these are all hoax papers where they talked about, one was about the dog owners, and they did some statistical and some ridiculous things like that, like dogs mating in a park and how that has something to do with rape culture. Some, just like totally crazy things like that, right? It sounded ridiculous, and so ridiculous that they actually got awards and the papers were accepted. Then they brought it out, they got replies back, and they filmed a little documentary and then showcase this whole the essentially the corruption behind the in academia in these social sciences fields, right? So the grievance study hoax, if you Google, you will find it. It's hilarious. It's a good watch. Now, similarly, what happens in Indology and is that and study of India is that a bunch of professors all get together, they study, and then they get a journal, and they run conferences, and they refer to each other, and essentially they let nobody in who has an opposing view. So if you have an opposing view or you want to debate, they don't even let you in. So this is not inquiry. This is not inquiry into truth or finding. This is not an academic inquiry in its real sense. So this is a program to indoctrinate. They have a narrative that they want to stick to. So Indology is something that is so corrupt. Anyone who listens to Rajiv Malhotra you can see how corrupt it is, how deep the corruption runs, how ubiquitous it is. It pervades all universities that have Indology studies. It also pervades Indian universities. And unfortunately, people like Ashoka and other, JNU are all trained. So if you want to be in Western academic circles and publish, you have to, the journals are all controlled by them. So you have to stick to the narrative, otherwise your paper will not be accepted. So the entire thing is very, very, very corrupt. So we need to establish our own ecosystem. We need to study the way the other studies us, and establish our own journals. China has begun to do that. China has their own journals. They study and they control the journals. They decide who gets published. So I think India has to do that. But unfortunately, we need an entire ecosystem we need to build around that.
It's been an eye-opening, fascinating conversation filled with many valuable suggestions. We thank Vijaya ji for her time and hope that the parents listening have found it to be an equally rewarding conversation. Please follow us on all social media like Twitter, Instagram, Facebook groups, Koo, Telegram with the handle @HinduParenting. We are also available on podcast platforms like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts. You can also find our podcasts on YouTube. Please subscribe to us at hinduparenting.substack.com to get our podcast directly in your email inbox. We will be back with another episode soon. Until then, namaste.